Well, good evening, and we welcome you to our Tonight Live, Thursday night, coming to you from West Frankfort, Illinois. And we are just so happy that you could join with us, and we're extremely happy to have a guest tonight, Dr. Robert Gentry. Dr. Gentry, we welcome you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and to be with us. We're going to hear some good things in a little bit about Dr. Gentry. Going to ask him to tell us a little bit about his story, how he came to know Jesus Christ, and how this man who is a scientist began to believe in creation. You know, CA, I believe in creation, and I know you do. We don't have any question about it. I love good scientific information, but I don't have to have it. I'm just be honest with you. I believe God. Sometimes I've had people say to me, you think that Moses knew how this world came into existence? I said, well, I know God did. And God says in the only part of the book that was written by his own finger, which is the Ten Commandments, right in the heart, the fourth commandment, he says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is. And my friend, that settles it with me. That is enough for me. And then Jesus comes along and he says absolutely nothing that corrects that. In fact, he makes that statement in John 14, 1-3, if it were not so, I would have told you. In other words, if the Old Testament wasn't true and all the promises of God's word weren't true, Jesus says, I would have told you. I would have told you the facts, and I have told you the facts. And over again, we see Jesus is the creator. So that settles it for me. But I want you to know that we live in a scientific age. We live in an age where our young people are hit with questions all the time. When they go to classrooms, I wish I could say it was only in secular classrooms, but unfortunately, even in some Christian schools, they have to defend their belief in creation. Therefore, I appreciate scientists like Dr. Robert Gentry, who have good, scientific, solid material to prove that God is the creator. And they can easily disprove the evolutionary theory. That in and of itself is very valuable. I've read some statements where teachers and professors have said, well, we've got to do something about these creationists because the young people are coming to school, they're coming to class, and they're having answers to questions or questions we can't answer. And so they are moving around trying to get the answers to some of these questions. And again, I appreciate people like Dr. Robert Gentry. Well, listen, tonight is a special night. So call your friends, especially if you have young people who may have some questions about creation or evolution, or you may even have some older people who do. You give them a call. Tell them, hey, tune in right now, radio, television, wherever you're hearing us. Have them tune in so that they can be a part of this program. And you can also be a part of the program by calling us or by emailing us, because we have a free book for you. This book is written by Dr. Walter C. Thompson, who for many, many years was the chairman of the board and is still on the board of 3ABN. And Dr. Thompson has written a book called Truth in the Balance, and it says awesome moments on planet Earth in the day of final judgment. Now, this is a fantastic book. This is a book sold for about $12, I think it was, and $9.99 it says on the back. I stand corrected. But this book you can have absolutely free tonight by just writing to us or calling us. Free offer at 3abn.org, and that's the best and simplest way to get it. Or you can call us at 618-627-4651, and we will get this on the way to you. We do appreciate you standing with us in your prayers and in your faithfulness, because it is through your generosity and God touching your heart, the Holy Spirit convincing you that we are able to stay on the air. And God is blessing this ministry. We're moving forward. We're launching out by faith. But I will tell you that every single day here is a day of prayer and of faith. And we thank you so much for your support. CA, do we have some music tonight?
Indeed we do. We met a young man who I believe is from Panama. If he is not, certainly his mother is, because my wife knows the family. His name is Victor Moreno. Pianist from the Chicago area, actually from the Hinsdale Church.
All right.
He's a minister of music there, and he is going to be playing really an old standard, we would call the song, Just As I Am.
Okay. Wow, he's good.
Oh, yeah. He is the minister of music at the Hinsdale Church in Chicago. He is, I checked with my wife, she's doing camera tonight. He is a fellow Panamanian, now living in the States, and my wife knows his family. That connection didn't have him come here. He comes here because he can play the piano.
Yeah. Right.
Had nothing to do with us. But he's a nice guy, and we have to bring him back. Yeah.
He is very good. I met him when we were in Hinsdale, and he also played for your meetings when we were up there.
He played a couple of nights for His Harvest is Ready.
Yeah.
You know, Jim, I wanted to say just before we turn it over, you know, the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. We talked with Dr. Gentry before. He's a physicist, you know.
Yes.
We're in the presence of a physicist tonight.
That's right.
So, you know, the Lord has designed this earth so that it can be understood. You know, it can be. If you inquire, you will get answers. Now, we were told that before the flood, the gold and the diamonds were really on top of the ground, sort of lying around for you to get. And then when the flood came and the earth was turned over, most of that stuff was buried.
Yeah.
So you can still get that gold, but you got to dig for it now. It's the same way with understanding the world. There are people who have dug down and have spent their life digging. And of course, the Lord says when you dig, you'll get answers. You'll find the gold.
That's right.
So tonight we're going to mine a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of a deeper discussion.
Right.
Dr. Gentry is a scholar.
He is.
You know, he's talking a language that sometimes we don't understand.
That's right.
So we're going to ask you to really locked down tonight because we're going to talk about some things. We're going to arm you, give you some ammunition. You may be like us. We're old-time guys. The Bible says God made the world in 6 days. We buy it. That God said it. That's it.
That's it.
But if you're someone who wants scientific foundation, and there are many out there who do, and we appreciate that also, this then is your night. So you want to get your computer fired up, your pencil, your pen, your paper, whatever you want to take notes on, because we're going to throw a lot at you, and it's going to be heavy. We'll tell you right now, you're going to get some heavy material.
Now, this man is the world's expert in polonium halos, which are what? In simple language.
Yeah, you got to explain polonium halos to us.
Right.
God's signature of his creation.
Okay. Which you find in?
Granite rocks all over the world.
All over the world.
In the beginning, the Lord laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of his hands.
Yes.
Foundations of the earth are the granite rocks.
Yeah.
And he put his signature in those rocks to help everyone today who really wants to know the truth about evolution, the 10 Commandments, the 4th Commandment, the Sabbath Commandment.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that.
All right. You know, Dr. Gentry, I first heard his name from my father-in-law, Roy Thurman. And Roy Thurman and George Vandeman were very good friends. And between those two, George Vandeman had introduced him to you. Right. How did you get interested in this belief? Because you didn't grow up a Seventh-day Adventist.
That's correct. Actually, Jim, as I've said before, I grew up in a Christian home. My mother was a wonderful Christian, believed the Bible, believed, Adam and Eve, everything about creation.
Yeah.
Went to the University of Florida, began to take the biology courses, and slowly thought, well, this cannot be true, because to me the biological aspect of the evolution just did not make any sense. But when I started to take the physics courses, started studying about radioactivity, and presumably the whole idea of radioactive decay has always been constant, is part and parcel of what you're taught in the physics curriculum. So when I learned, this is what geologists were using, they'll analyze a rock for uranium and then the daughter product lead, and they can say, well, if uranium goes into lead at a constant rate, we measure the uranium, measure the lead, the rock could be 1 million, 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, 2 billion years old. I thought, this is it. I have arrived. I have arrived because I still believe the Bible, but I got to the place when I took then a graduate course in cosmology, what we're going to be talking about tonight, the Big Bang. The professor was the student, PhD student, of one of the world's greatest Big Bang cosmologists of his day. And so when he began to describe the ins and outs of the Big Bang in the classroom, it sounded like, again, there can be no greater theory of the origin of the universe than the Big Bang and everything it holds together. So I became a Big Bang cosmologist there in getting a master's degree at the University of Florida, and went out then to the defense industry and began to convince as many people as would listen that the Big Bang was true and the days of creation were not 6 literal days at all. And I didn't know anything about the Sabbath at that particular time. But anyway, I thought I had arrived with a complete understanding of both the Bible and science. But here the day came when my wife and I moved to Orlando, Florida, and a friend atheist of mine came to work one day saying he had seen an unusual program that Sunday night, the previous night. My wife and I needed to look at it. We did. We saw this preacher talking about unusual things as far as the Bible was concerned that I had not heard of before. It was George Vandeman. We continued to go to the meetings, and then later on, we actually became Seventh-day Adventists. But actually, I confided with George Vandeman. I said, there's one thing that really is bothering me. Here I am, in a sense, I have been a big-time Big Bang evolutionist, cosmic evolution of the universe, which means, you see, the galaxies, the stars, the earth, the sun, all of us are today presumably a part of what started 13.7 billion years ago. Matter came out of absolutely nothing. It says that's what they believe. That's what I was taught. Can you imagine all the matter in the universe just spewing out of absolutely nothing from nothing to begin with? Talk about people having faith in the Bible.
Right.
There's nobody has any faith.
That takes more faith than anything. Right.
Anyway, but that, see, is couched in such a language. Here's the issue that we're going to be talking about tonight, and then I'll finish in just a minute. The issue is that how in the world did people like myself or anybody become convinced of a theory that says, you know, at the very outset, everything in the universe just spews out of nothing for no good reason.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that was a big, I didn't realize just how significantly I had been brainwashed. But anyway, here's the issue with George Vanderman. After we became baptized, I talked to all the people I could find. I said, how are you going to explain the ancient age of the earth, constant radioactivity and so forth, explain the Big Bang? He said, well, you know, you got to take some things by faith, but, you know, maybe there's an answer somewhere. Anyway, I then transferred from Orlando, Florida, University of Florida, for a couple of years, and that was in the back part of my mind all the time. What's going to be the solution to this conflict that I have? Because I figured that the God of heaven is a God of logic, a God of justice, he's a God of truth,
right.
And there's just no way, I thought, that in the final analysis, God was going to leave something in the earth that would indicate the earth is billions of years old, not in accord with the Bible, and yet on the other hand, put it in the Bible. To me, it was just a logical contradiction, and so my wife and I talked about it, and then I went to teach at a little college up in Washington State, Walla Walla College, and while I was there, that issue came up, and I tried to talk to people up there, and they said, all you got to do is believe that indeed the earth is old and life is young. I said, well, you know, people who say that don't understand that the actual radioactive dating methods that measure the ages of the rocks measure the ages of the rocks that have the fossils in them.
Yes.
I said, it's only within the Adventist circles that people go around with this myth. It's a myth. The scientific community of the world knows it's a myth, and the reason the Adventists don't get any greater comeback for that is because they don't say it very much, and they don't say it to the people who know that the actual truth is you cannot divide the radioactive dating methods into something that pertains just to the inorganic matter of the earth and then the organic matter itself. Anyway, I was told up there at Walla Walla, you know, if you really want to make a contribution to the church, you got to get a PhD. I only had a master's degree. So I said, okay, if that's what it's going to take. So I went to Georgia Tech as a teacher there, instructor there, and immediately went to the chairman of the department and I said, here's the situation. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I previously believed everything in the world about evolution, but now I want to do my thesis topic on a reinvestigation of the age of the earth, which he knew also meant the Big Bang. And so we talked back and forth. We became good friends. Anyway, he said, Bob, here's the situation. If you do that, guess what would happen? First of all, he said, I think your chances of finding anything are microscopic. But he said, even so, what if I were to let you stay here? What if you were to find something microscopic wrong with evolution, tiny as it might be? You would want to publish it under the auspices of Georgia Tech Institute in Georgia Tech. And he said, here's the problem. If you did that, and what would the other say? This is the first-rate scientific institution in America, Georgia Tech Institute of Technology. He said there would be pandemonium here in this campus, chaos, because 99.9% except myself were evolutionists. Okay?
Yes.
And not only evolutionists, but a lot of atheists there.
Right.
And so I would challenge not only the Big Bang and so forth, but the fundamental premise of why they're atheists, which is that there is no God, which is there is no God, no evidence for creation. Anyway, the day came, he said, Bob, if you're so insistent about wanting to do something with respect to the Big Bang and evolution and the age of the earth, he said, I don't have any choice but to tell you, if it means that much to you, to find out what you think is going to be the truth. Bob, you're just running up the wrong hill, man, because the physics community is loaded with PhDs in physics. They spent their lifetime studying physics. 100,000 men, 150,000, 200,000 scientists have gone before you, and they've decided the earth is billions of years old, and the Big Bang is true. So you think you're going to go in there and find something you know? And I said, you know, all you say may be true, but that doesn't take away the fact that I want to know the truth for myself. I said, up to now, these PhDs you're talking about, the people I've learned under, they have taught me what they say is the truth. But I said, I want to find the truth for myself. Anyway, I did leave, and I started my work independently, my wife, and I had 2 children, 1 on the way. Finances were very, very small in those days, but to me it meant something to search for the truth for myself, because I figured, again, that the 4th commandment, the God of heaven coming down on Mount Sinai, and giving us the Ten Commandments, him writing, as you said earlier,
Right.
Jim, with his own finger. There it is, right in the middle of the Ten Commandments. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. How can that possibly include the ancient age of the earth, an ancient cosmos, something coming spewing out of nothing for no good reason? The Creator is not involved at all. So I said, all right, I'll leave. And I did leave, and I started to work. And guess what? I started to study the foundation rocks of the earth, the granite rocks. Remember he said, you know,
Right.
he thought my chances were microscopic. That's what I started to do.
Yes.
Study the granite rocks under the microscope. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a little bit. But the whole issue here is, as I got started in this work, it was because I wanted to know the truth for myself, number one. Number two, I realized as I got out of the academic environment and wasn't listening to what other people told me was the truth, then I began to, I prayed for the Holy Spirit to lead and guide and direct. I said, my prayer was, teach me the truth. I'm not interested in what the other people were telling me, because there's a huge contradiction between what they're saying and what they're teaching to the world and what people are believing. And I want to know the truth for myself. So anyway, we're going to get into this now, and especially with respect to this Big Bang. The bottom line is, I became an evolutionist, and it really affected my life. My brother became, from a person who was very, very dedicated in believing in God, his faith began to waver because he became an evolutionist.
Yes.
I decided, Jim, CA, if the Lord ever allowed me to find anything, I was going to try to help as many people as I could to realize that indeed there is not only no contradiction, the problem is on the other side. The people who believe in the Big Bang, the people who believe in evolution, have accepted a huge set of erroneous assumptions.
Yes.
It's not the data itself that's incorrect. I didn't know that. It's the assumptions that turn the data into a theory. That's where the problem is. That's where the problem has always been. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. But with respect now to the fact that I didn't get a PhD, I left without getting a PhD. So it's very kind of you and CA to call me doctor tonight.
We've given you a doctorate.
Well,
We believe that God has.
Well, I tell you what, one of the small colleges I worked for a while thought the work I was doing down at Oak Ridge was significant enough to give me an honorary doctorate.
All right.
That's why I'm called a doctorate. But you know something, Jim, CA, I'm a very ordinary person, very, very ordinary. And as far as our conversation tonight is concerned, I try to help people to understand my favorite way of being called anything is simply Bob. So if we could do that tonight.
Okay.
I'm with you. I'm nothing special. I'm a very ordinary person. The Lord is blessed, and we're here together tonight to try to explore these blessings for the sake of others. Okay? All right.
You have done something, though, that is extremely important. You have found some information that has really rocked the scientific world when they look at it. I've been reading through some of your material today, and when individuals have actually seen this and looked at what God has helped you to discover, it really rocks them. They don't have an answer for some of these things that you have. And there are a lot of people today that feel like that they can somehow unite the Big Bang theory and creation as believers. So, but as we visited today, you say that is not possible.
Impossible.
Okay.
We'll find out why it's impossible.
All right.
Well, let's go ahead and get started with
All right,
the
we're
program
ready.
tonight.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say, first of all, our first slide. Are we ready for the program?
Okay.
All right. On April 1, I'll be in, the Lord willing, I'll be in Atlanta. American Physical Society meeting has a meeting there this year, and they have annual meetings, and I always present a paper, what we call a contributed paper. And basically, I'm going to have it there in such a way, I'm going to be responding to an article that appeared in Science magazine just in November. There's a very, very famous lady physicist. She has written all sorts of papers, very, very famous. She doesn't believe in the God as we do. She says that indeed, basically, there's no evidence of creation. And for that reason, basically, scientists, she says, all over the world are looking for evidence of God. But she says there is no evidence of God because there's no evidence of creation. I sent her an email back a couple of months ago and said, here is the evidence, you've missed it and so forth, but I would appreciate a response. In fact, I said, give me an invitation and I'll come and speak at Harvard University. Well, she didn't respond, but nevertheless, here's the situation. I'm going to talk about the technical details of what we're going to be talking about tonight. I'll have a poster there for 3 hours, and so we're going to go into the great detail of the technical details of what we're going to be talking about at that meeting in Atlanta. Also, I've got a couple of websites. I've got many scientific articles and so forth about the Big Bang. So the people here tonight, the physicists, the PhD physicists and others, are looking for a real solid answer.
Yes.
If we don't get around to giving all the solid answers they want tonight, the details, it's going to be there in Atlanta. It's also in my website. Also, I've got a paper in for publication. And the bottom line, the reason you haven't heard any more about this than you have as far as the people in the world are concerned, there's been a cover-up, bottom line cover-up. They don't want this information to come to light. Why? Because there's a structure to the American side, there's a structure to the world scientific community. These people have gotten the PhDs, they've elevated their positions in their minds to the utmost, and by that the world then looks at them as the propagators of truth. You want to know something about the Big Bang and where we all came from? You go ask a Big Bang cosmologist and so forth. So the whole issue here is that the public is looking at these people with PhDs and so forth who write the books and tell us all about the galaxies and how the Big Bang got started and so forth. They look to these people as authorities instead of looking to you folks, basically, who are the arbiters of real truth because you're standing by the Bible. Let's go ahead and go to the slides then, the next slide. Here we've got a little picture of what's really happening in the world and why things haven't come out any more than they have. This is an oil rig. You remember the BP situation there?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
All right, that's the modern day Big Bang. The Big Bang holds together on 4 fundamental assumptions. Origin of the matter, space-time expansion, conservation of energy, and then basically the universe being the same everywhere. Those are the 4 supports. Now here's the situation. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to go over these somewhat rapidly in a sense. Next slide. There we go. Here's the situation that proves exactly what I'm saying. Years and years ago, for 1,300 years, astronomers in the world believed that indeed the Earth was the center of the solar system and it was fixed. Now the sun and all the planets were moving around the Earth. 1,300 years, 1,300 years. A man by the name of Copernicus comes along and he looks at the data very carefully without listening now to other people who believed in what Ptolemy said. He said, listen guys, you've got it all wrong. It's the sun that's the center, and all these planets are moving around the sun. Did you know that indeed Copernicus almost didn't even publish it? He was getting such a negative reaction to it. But finally, a mathematician came to him and said, you really need to get this published. So he did. Now, that didn't change things overnight. The very fact of the matter is 1,300 years worth of, accepting something as the truth and believing the astronomers had the truth left a lot of people wondering, well, really, is this new theory correct? Now, that's an example, then, of what I just said.
Wrong assumptions.
Wrong assumptions led people 1,300 years to have a wrong understanding of the nature of our own solar system. Now, let's continue. Next slide. Here's let's go back to the Copernican one there just for a moment. There we go. That's the Copernican astronomy. Sun in the center, all the planets revolving around the sun, as we all know.
Yes.
We send space probes and we find this is exactly true. No question about that. So Copernicus then changed the scientific format of the day. But more than that, he helped physicists everywhere to understand that they should never, ever try to build another cosmological model without doing what? Validating the fundamental assumptions of the theory. Guess what? Guess what? Let's go to the next slide. What's going to happen if some of those foundations collapse? It begins to slide into the sea. All right, let's think about this. The foundations then of the Big Bang. We just talked about them just a minute ago. What are those foundations? Let's go to the next slide. 1929, Edmund Hubble looked through the telescope, the Hale telescope, the 100-inch telescope, and he saw that the galaxies, as he viewed them there with the Hale telescope, got smaller and smaller and smaller with distance. We can all understand that. A car recedes, it views as getting smaller to our eyes. But what he also found was that the redshift, the shift of the light coming from those galaxies, was now shifted to the red end of the spectrum. Orderly, orderly, orderly. This man found something that no one had ever found before. He found there was order, not only generally speaking to the things we do every day, and science, so forth, but he found there was order to the solar system. Why is it that the galaxies were so equally spaced in time and redshift and so forth with distance? Big, big, big question. Now, if he had interpreted that shift the way he should have with the Doppler effect, meaning that indeed they're really speeding away from us, he would have announced the greatest astronomical discovery ever. What he did, though, was to say, he actually said in some of his reports, it's a horror, it's a terrible thing to think that the universe has a center. In other words, if you trace back what he was looking at, remember he said, we're at the Earth, but he saw all the galaxies getting smaller away from the Earth. No matter which way he pointed his telescope, he saw the same thing. Everything moving away from a point near us, or our point. Could be only one thing, center of the universe. But Hubble said in his scientific reports in his book, no, we are not going to accept this idea of a universal center. We're not going to do it. And other astronomers joined in. They did not want a center to the universe. Why? Because a center to the universe, you can have order in the solar system. You can have order on the Earth and so forth. But once you say there's order to the universe, everything is moving away from a certain point, only one thing comes to the mind. God.
Yes.
God. You've got to have someone who ordered the universe. It's not just a matter of the solar system now. So they determined they were not going to accept this idea of interpreting Hubble's discovery in terms of the redshift. They're going to invent a new model of the redshift, looking at the galaxies. So what happened? Well, there was a man by the name of Einstein, very, very famous. You all know about him. He had what is called a field equation. Now remember, folks, tonight we've said we're not going to involve ourselves with the details of all the technical aspects of what I'm going to say. I'm just going to say Einstein, field equation. Solving the field equation, one way, you still believed everything was a Doppler effect. The other way was what is called an expanding space-time solution. Boy, doesn't that sound intelligent? Doesn't it sound scientific? Expanding space-time solution? Anyway, there was a solution of just an equation, okay? Now, what does that mean? Well, they said, a lot of astronomers got together in 1931. They said, we got to do something about this Hubble discovery, because if we don't do something, people are going to wake up. They're going to find out that indeed there is a nearby center. Besides that, Psalm 103:15, you know, in this universe of yours, Lord, the throne is established. Your throne is established. And people are going to say, well, wait a minute. If there's a center, the Bible talks about the throne of God all the time, people are going to say, wait a minute. That center has got to be the throne of God. It's in the Bible all over the place. It's interesting to me that some of the Adventists or some Christians somewhere did not take to the task of saying, look, Hubble, the very fact of the matter is you're just interpreting and you're simply saying there's no center. You don't know that. Yeah. The very fact of the matter is everything is moving away from where we are orderly throughout the whole universe. There's got to be more than some chance. Anyway, the fact of the matter is, though, no one did that. That's what should have been done. So these astronomers in 1931, they gathered over there at Cambridge, and they said, we got to build this new theory. And this new theory was built upon this new solution of the field equations, expanding space-time solution. Whoa, that's enough to make you want to believe anything. You know, if you're a graduate student like I was, and you got this really great professor telling you expanding space-time solution, all the galaxies are moving apart. Let me tell you what happened at that time. The expanding space-time solution applying to the Big Bang is the following. It says that if you have a particle of light called a quanta or a photon emitted from some distant galaxy, okay, then as it travels across the universe, it's going to become lengthened. What he did was to stand at the front of the classroom there were only 3 of us in the class. He got to the left-hand side of the room, big, long blackboard, and he wrote the symbol lambda there. He said, this is how the photon begins its travel across the universe, wavelength lambda. That's the standard symbol for the wavelength of the light particle. Then he walks across the room to the other side of the room, far side of the room, and he writes on the blackboard lambda prime. He said that's how it ends up after it's traveled throughout the universe. And he said lambda prime, the expanding space-time solution of the field equations means the lambda prime now is greater than the lambda, the first wavelength over here. And I looked at it, and I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. I know enough physics to know that if the wavelength is here greater than the wavelength over there, the energy is inversely proportional to the wavelength. So that means the energy of the particle it began with is going to be less than the energy of the particle over here at the end. So I raised my hand. I said, well, here's my question. If the wavelength here at the end is greater than the wavelength over here, what's happened? It's lost energy. So I said, where did the energy go? He looked at me. He looked at the other members of the class. He looked back at the blackboard. He looked at the lambda prime. He walked back over to the other side of the
class dismissed.
He looked back over to the where he had started, and he looked at lambda. And he comes back to the center of the class right before all three of us. He said, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. And I thought, you don't know? You're one of the great, you studied under one of the greatest Big Bang cosmologists in the world. You don't know? Anyway, he didn't say anything more about it, and I didn't press the issue at that time. Class was over. The other two guys in the class came up and they said, well, you really asked a very interesting question, didn't you? I said, well, this is just one day. He's going to think about it. Tomorrow he'll come back. When the next class period he'll come back. He'll give us the answer. Next class period came. He didn't say anything. Right. The next class period came. He didn't say anything. The whole class, the semester ended. He didn't say anything. And so that stayed in the back part of my mind. I thought, how can this be? And I was the one who raised the question. I said, energy is lost. Where did it go? Well, in any event, as I said earlier, I did succeed in becoming a Big Bang cosmologist because it seemed like, supposedly I was told, stars form from the residue of the Big Bang. Then the galaxies form. I mean, they wave their hands all over the place saying a star can form here and a galaxy can form here, and then millions of galaxies, and then billions of galaxies, and trillions of galaxies. But it all seemed to be so scientific because this man was an authority. I was following the authority, scientific authority of the day. That's all there was to it. I was brainwashed just like that, didn't realize it. Just like in my other physics courses. I could study about radioactivity in the here and now, but then all of a sudden they said, we're going to apply radioactivity to the age of the Earth, to the age of the cosmos. And so therefore we're going to say the uniformity, radioactive decay in the here and now has always been true. So this is why we get billions of years. And, my naive mind at that particular time getting started, man, if I wanted to become a physicist, I've got to be a physicist. I've got to believe what's being taught because that's the only way I'll ever make it in life. So anyway, that's what caused me then to become Big Bang physicist, Big Bang cosmologist, Big Bang ancient age of the Earth with the life on Earth and everything else. Well, then sooner or later, of course, I went out in the defense industry, as I said, telling people about the Big Bang and everything. Then I heard George Vanneman. Then I went to this Walla Walla College and was told I need to get a PhD and went to Georgia Tech. And there was told, Bob, if you want to be a physicist, you got to join the ranks. You got to be one of us. The only way you can do that is to be a PhD man. Well, as I said, I decided to leave because I wasn't going to be a PhD man following other people. I wanted to find out for myself. And so it's been a long road. But the God of heaven has certainly blessed. I don't have any credit, don't deserve any credit. But it's an answer to prayer. What you're hearing tonight from me is fully and completely an answer to prayer. As I have worked, spent my life 30 and more years looking at all this, I had to be careful not to allow myself to take in the old assumptions about the foundations of the Big Bang and everything else. So let's continue then. The issue is the foundations of the Big Bang. Are they really true? Go ahead, let's go ahead. Well, remember I told you a few minutes ago, they invented this space-time expansion wavelength. And man, does it ever sound impressive. Space-time expansion wavelength. Well, you can look at this little schematic up there. Left-hand side, you get the Big Bang, that blue or the orange-yellow spot there. What they say is that indeed space itself is going to expand. Now, nothing could be more ridiculous. That's all there is to it. But the world believes it. I believe it. But it's filled with people believing that indeed something like this chair, for example, the space it occupies. Yesterday, you don't know it, but it occupied a different amount of space. It was less than it is today. And tomorrow it's going to occupy a larger space. Yeah. Now, well, it's solid. What we're basically saying, though, is I actually misstated something. I'm going to correct it right now. The chair itself is not going to expand, okay? But the actual space that it supposedly is going to occupy, that space has expanded, so now the chair is sitting inside of a larger box, okay? Let's go back to the schematic we had just a minute ago. You can see in these boxes that this is the expansion of space, if we can get back to the formula. If we can't get, there it is right there. See, space is expanding, the small box, that's the way it starts out, supposedly. And the wiggles in there, that's the wavelength of the light to begin with. But then later on, the box, now this is not a real true box, this is simply symbolic of the expansion of space itself. Space itself has expanded. So now the wavelengths in that space that is expanding, it's expanding too. Then it keeps on expanding. So therefore, the light then changes from a normal yellow to orange to red. So this then is the reason why Big Bang cosmologists say there's a redshift. This supposedly explains the Hubble redshift relationship because they've put it in some of the other equations, and it turns out supposedly this fits the data. Now that's most important. In other words, if you use this theory, you can explain the data. Now, this stands throughout all of Big Bang cosmology. Why did people believe the Ptolemaic cosmology model of Earth being the center and all the planets and everything going around it? Because it fit. They had an idea, they had a conception that made it fit that particular model. So what the Big Bang cosmologists have done, what I used to do, I see all these observations, and it turns out the Big Bang theory has been developed in such a way that you can include a multitude of observations. And so what they say is the Big Bang is true because the observations can be fitted into this new model of expanding space-time and expanding space itself.
Yeah. You know, I want to just put a little theological note there. A number of things jump out at me, and not to cut you off, but I didn't know that there was so much of science that was subjective. If you start with a premise and you interpret your data in light of that premise, all you do is reinforce your premise. And if your premise is wrong, you reinforce your error. It's like so many times we've heard people say, you know, I just never thought about Sabbath. My pastor told me Sunday. His pastor told him Sunday. I just never really thought about it. And when people said anything about Sunday, I took their evidence in light of Sunday's the right day. Right. So if you start with a faulty premise, everything you build on that platform is going to be faulty, but it will reinforce the faulty premise. I was always told that the hallmark of science is that you take the data and let the data explain itself. You come with a clean slate and let the data explain itself. But evidently, there is an aspect of science that is presupposed. This is the truth. So now let's go out and find some data to reinforce our truth, rather than starting with the data and then developing a truth from the data that exists.
There are two aspects of what you said. There are the laws of physics that have been developed experimentally. Their foundations have been tested experimentally in the laboratory.
Yes.
Electricity and magnetism, thermodynamics, nuclear physics, everything in these theories has been tested, and the foundational assumptions have been found to be true. What's happened is that these foundation theories have been applied then to the past. That's where the problem comes in. You've got to make assumptions with respect to the rates and so forth about the processes going on today, or you got to make some faulty assumptions about space expanding with no basis whatsoever. I want to get into that right now. Anyway, I believed all this, and I was out telling people about space expanding and the wavelengths expanding and so forth all my life, until I began to look at it from another standpoint myself. So let's go ahead as we look at the other slides here. You're absolutely right. Look on the left-hand side of that. Here's another slide, and basically you can see that this is now emblematic of basically what the Big Bang people believe. When the universe is small, that small circle represents the universe. And those wiggly lines represent the actual wavelength, a certain wavelength. Then as the universe expands, you get a larger circle. That's just emblematic of the larger circle, the larger volume of the universe. And you can see the actual wavelength lines themselves are getting wider. Now look at the left-hand side of that box. Expansion demands non-conservation of energy equal to our gargantuan 30 million times the mass of the visible universe. People don't understand that indeed, thank you. People don't understand that indeed the amount of energy that is lost in the Big Bang is 30 million times the mass of the visible universe. You don't understand it. Why? They don't understand. Pardon me. They don't understand it because the scientists don't say it. David and I published this way back in 1998. Guess how many people have taken exception to what we said? None. We're living in an age where there's a giant cover-up, absolutely a giant cover-up, with respect to this fundamental issue of conservation of energy. There is no conservation of energy in the Big Bang. And again, for those who are listening tonight who are technically oriented, this is all on my website, halos.com or halos.tv, or I'll be presenting it there in Atlanta on April 1. So what I'm saying is, first of all, it's very, very easy to show non-conservation of energy as part of the Big Bang. Impossible for it to support then that conservation of energy foundation principle. Foundational principle of the Big Bang, conservation of energy, is completely wrong, absolutely completely wrong, collapses. Now, let's continue. What other aspects of Big Bang are incorrect? Next slide. Well, here we're going right now to our original slide, the Big Bang, and with all the supports there for the Big Bang. And we just decided, we just found out, of course, that conservation of energy really doesn't work at all. So let's continue. What else doesn't work? In other words, if that one begins to collapse, the whole rig begins to waver toward the water. But let's go ahead and continue. Next slide. Let's go to the Earth itself. The Earth itself has a theory. I should say geologists have a theory with respect to the Earth. That is, that granite rock formed deep in the Earth as it cooled over long, long periods of time. Supposedly it cooled deep in the Earth 13, 14 miles, okay? So that means that it took hundreds of thousands or millions of years to actually solidify. But what we found when we actually look at the rocks themselves, next slide, I found these little circles. We don't have time to go into the details of the circles tonight, except to say they represent the radioactive decay of polonium-218, which has only a 3-minute half-life. The bottom line is as follows. If you have a glass of water, put an Alka-Seltzer in it, let it fizz for 30 seconds, it's all gone. Unless you were to freeze that water almost instantly, then you would have no bubbles. But the very fact of the matter is, these circles in the granite rocks all over the world show that indeed it had to be an instantaneous creation in order for those bubbles, those circles, to be there. We might have a little bit more. Now, next slide. Go ahead.
Let's walk through that slowly. I like that. You hit on something that my brain can wrap itself around. If you have you put a tablet of Alka-Seltzer in water, a minute later it's gone. If 1,000 years later that Alka-Seltzer is still there, it means that that water was solidified, that thing froze instantaneously. So then the fact that those halos, those little deals that have a half-life of how long?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. So 3 minutes after they're created, they're gone, are still there, means that that rock was created like that. God spoke it, rock was there.
That's right.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's why, you know, the next time somebody gets smart with you, Jim, tell them, what about
Just
the polonium halos? Yeah. Or go get some Alka-Seltzer, or tell them, what about the polonium halos? That's a powerful argument.
It is.
You know, I don't take any credit because I looked at after I left Georgia Tech and was looking into the microscope for a year and a half or 2 years, I kept seeing these under the microscope and I thought something is wrong because in my mind, you see, I was still partially a Big Bang, ancient age of the Earth. Granite rocks were still coming slowly, you know, deep underground. And I saw these halos in that rock, and I saw the half-life was very short, and just like you said, the Alka-Seltzer analogy, you know, how can you possibly get these halos? Because everybody knows, in my mind, that granite rocks cool slowly deep underground hundreds of thousands of years. So if the magma was there slowly cooling, it's impossible for those halos to be there.
It wouldn't be there anymore,
So I just went over and over in my mind for weeks and months, probably 6 months or a year. One day I was looking under the microscope, and I thought, what in the world is going on? I don't understand this. 2 Bible texts came into view, not to view. flashed in my mind. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made,
Yeah.
and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. Lord, you left your signature of creation in the foundations of the earth. That's what they're here for. There's all this confusion about your creation, and you left your signature of creation in the foundation rocks, just like Hebrews 1:10. In the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth. Heavens are the work of your hands. So that night, I mean, I knew the Holy Spirit flashed those words in my mind, okay? So I went to see some people, a good friend of mine, who had been very, very positive in supporting me and trying to keep me going on this search. I went to see him that night and told him what had happened that day. I said, I believe the Lord really flashed his thoughts in my mind. He said, Bob, you better be careful. You may have made a mistake. Then I went down to Columbus, Georgia. There were some people down there that were supporting me at the rate of $300 a month, which I was very, very thankful for. Went down and told them. I said, look, these halos exist. There's only one explanation. I mean, I've got this thought today, this flash in my mind. He said, you better be careful. You may have made a mistake. And so I realized instantly the only way this will ever go out to the world, have anyone understand the truth, is for me to get into a laboratory, publish scientific papers on this evidence over and over and over again. I went up to college, Columbia Union College, for several years, and there actually published a paper. One of the papers, first of all, I didn't shoot for any winky-dink paper in some obscure scientific journal. There are two scientific journals in the world that are preeminent, premier, read by everybody worldwide. Science here in America, Nature over in England. I went to the science editor there in Washington, D.C., turned in a paper after doing a lot of experiments, and basically the experiments were of such a nature to show that the polonium there was not secondary of any kind, it was primordial, made in the beginning, with nothing to begin with. So in any event, turned that paper in for publication, came back, one of the referees okayed it. All these papers go out for referees. The first one of the referees okayed it, and the second referee said, well, there's sure something unusual going on here, because it seems like this guy is saying he's found these polonium halos, and it looks like he's saying it's primordial. Primordial means, having made without anything before, no ancestors. So I said, I don't think you ought to publish this. So the editor wrote back, associate editor wrote back and said, it doesn't look like we're going to have to publish your paper. So I decided, I said, well, how about me coming down and talking to you about this? He said, well, okay. Anyway, I go into his office, and of course, in the paper, I had Columbia Union College as a place I was working for. He said, I walked in his office, he said, are you a Seventh-day Adventist? I said, yeah. He said, how old do you think the earth is? Well, as a result of that discovery and what I've read, 6,000 years. You know what he said? I'm associate editor to this magazine, but he said, I'm an evolutionary geologist. I know all about dating methods. I know all about evolutionary geology. I know, everything. And you're coming in here this day and telling me you think the earth is only 6,000 years old, and these halos, what do you think the evidence is? I said, it's God. God created those halos, put them in the rocks, so that people would know the truth about the origin of the earth. Man, he could have tossed me out of the office just like that. But you know what he said? He saw the evidence for himself. He was a very, very intelligent geologist. He was also a very, very fair individual. He said, all right, I'll tell you what. I'll send your manuscript out to two other referees. He picked two of the leading world authorities, one of them in radioactivity and the other in cosmology. I'll tell you in a minute how I know that. Anyway, the one he sent it out to with respect to radioactivity, he writes back and he says, is Gentry trying to say that indeed, and this is now the referee report, it's in my book, for anyone who's interested, it's in my book, I've actually got it there in the book. Is Gentry trying to say that he's found evidence to show that indeed, well, let me back up and say, in the Big Bang, you got the Big Bang, then you got stars, you got galaxies, but where does all the matter come from? Well, it's not in the Big Bang because that's only hydrogen and helium. But in the stars burn for a long period of time, then there's supernova. And you build heavier elements in the supernova. So that's going to happen over and over and over and over again over a period of time. Anyway, is Gentry trying to say that he's found evidence that would delimit the time period from where we are now, or basically the time of the creation of the earth, way back to the time of supernova? In other words, wiping out all the history of the Earth. He's recognizing that indeed, if these are basically primordial polonium halos, then you've got not only just the age of the Earth and all the rocks of the Earth being created simultaneously and initially, but you've got the actual matter itself, the nucleogenesis of all the elements that we're made of, that the Earth is made of, that the cosmos is made of. He is recognizing in that referee report that basically what I'm saying is you wipe out all of the Big Bang because you've got something created that the Big Bang says took millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years to make in supernova explosions, millions and millions and millions of them, finally come down to make the sun, and then here we are. So that referee report then went back to the editor. And he said, well, it sure is something, isn't it? In other words, I was getting better acquainted with this man.
Yes.
He saw that, and the important thing is, you see in this, sending back this review, he said, I want to talk to this man. Me. He said, I want to get in touch with this man because he was the world's expert in what is called extinct natural radioactivity, which means the radioactivity that was formed in all those supernova explosions and lasted until the time that the Earth formed. Supposedly, in the Big Bang Theory, that's millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years. And this man was saying, you know, he understood me saying it was only a few minutes. He said, I need to talk to you. And so he sent his name. He put his name on the referee report, and his editor sent it back to me and said, I want to talk to you. I immediately called him, long distance, at Carnegie Mellon University. And at that particular time...
Good, Doctor, we're going to put a little pin in here.
Yes, sir.
Because we've come down right to the nether end of our first hour. This is exciting, and I want to, when we come back, I want to do a little recap, because you said a couple of things. When you go from billions of years down to less than 10,000 years, you got to justify that. And there's a couple of questions I want to ask you, some things we want to get into. This is exciting stuff.
And we also want to hear the end of that story about what that gentleman said when he did get in touch with you. We'll be back right after this. Are calling us. Free offer at 3abn.org, and that's the best and simplest way to get it. Or you can call us at 618-627-4651, and we will get this on the way to you. We do appreciate you standing with us in your prayers and in your faithfulness, because it is through your generosity and God touching your heart, the Holy Spirit convincing you, that we are able to stay on the air. And God is blessing this ministry. We're moving forward. We're launching out by faith But I will tell you that every single day here is a day of prayer and of faith. And we thank you so much for your support. CA, do we have some music tonight?
Indeed we do. We met a young man who I believe is from Panama. If he is not, certainly his mother is, because my wife knows the family. His name is Victor Moreno. Pianist from the Chicago area, actually from the Hinsdale Church.
All right.
He's a minister of music there. And he is going to be playing really an old standard, we would call the song, Just As I Am.
Okay. I love good scientific information, but I don't have to have it. I'm just be honest with you. I believe God. Sometimes I've had people say to me, you think that Moses knew how this world came into existence? I said, well, I know God did. And God says in the only part of the book that was written by his own finger, which is the Ten Commandments, right in the heart, the fourth commandment, he says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. And my friend, that settles it with me. That is enough for me. And then Jesus comes along and he says absolutely nothing that corrects that. In fact, he makes that statement in John 14, 1-3, if it were not so, I would have told you. In other words, if the Old Testament wasn't true and all the promises of God's Word weren't true, Jesus says, I would have told you. I would have told you the facts, and I have told you the facts. And over again, we see Jesus is the Creator. So that settles it for me. But I want you to know that we live in a scientific age. We live in an age where our young people are hit with questions all the time. When they go to classrooms, I wish I could say it was only in secular classrooms, but unfortunately, even in some Christian schools, they have to defend their belief in creation. Therefore, I appreciate scientists like Dr. Robert Gentry, who have good, scientific, solid material. Well, good evening, and we welcome you to our Tonight Live, Thursday night, coming to you from West Frankfort, Illinois. And we are just so happy that you could join with us, and we're extremely happy to have a guest tonight, Dr. Robert Gentry. Dr. Gentry, we welcome you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and to be with us. We're going to hear some good things in a little bit about Dr. Gentry. Going to ask him to tell us a little bit about his story, how he came to know Jesus Christ, and how this man who is a scientist began to believe in creation. You know, CA, I believe in creation, and I know you do. We don't have any question about it, to prove that God is the creator. And they can easily disprove the evolutionary theory. That in and of itself is very valuable. I've read some statements where teachers and professors have said, well, we've got to do something about these creationists because the young people are coming to school, they're coming to class, and they're having answers to questions or questions we can't answer. And so they are moving around trying to get the answers to some of these questions. And again, I appreciate people like Dr. Robert Gentry. Well, listen, tonight is a special night, so call your friends, especially if you have young people who may have some questions about creation or evolution, or you may even have some older people who do. You give them a call. Tell them, hey, tune in right now, radio, television, wherever you're hearing us, have them tune in so that they can be a part of this program. And you can also be a part of the program by calling us or by emailing us, because we have a free book for you. This book is written by Dr. Walter C. Thompson, who for many, many years was the chairman of the board and is still on the board of 3ABN. And Dr. Thompson has written a book called Truth in the Balance, and it says awesome moments on planet Earth in the day of final judgment. Now, this is a fantastic book. This is a book sold for about $12, I think it was, and $9.99 it says on the back. I stand corrected. But this book you can have absolutely free tonight by just writing to us